What a gift a warm mid-February day is, because today I get to do one of the most satisfying jobs in the garden. Hey everyone, I'm Erin, the Impatient Gardener. I live and garden in southeastern Wisconsin, zone 5B, 6A, and it's been close to 50 degrees today, which is just like revolutionary. Not only is it just good for the soul, it's good for cars, which you get to get washed and need it badly. But in terms of the garden, it means I get to get out in the garden and actually do something, because I have not been able to do anything in this garden for basically months now, short of walk around it and look at it. And there is a really important job that needs to get done, and that is some tree maintenance. So the best time to prune most trees is in winter, because they're as dormant as they're going to be, the sap is not flowing. That does start to change, and actually we're on the cusp of that. I just heard that some people are starting to tap maple trees here, which means the sap is starting to flow, which means it is high time to get on with some of my pruning jobs, particularly of some of the trees that are quite sensitive to that. And in my case, that is in particular my hornbeams. Although I've showed you this process before, it's interesting to look at this again, because now I'm looking at trees that I've planted in the last 8 years or so. One of them I just planted last year. But it's nice to revisit these trees because, of course, trees are changing and growing over time, and so their needs are changing as well. But before we get to the pruning, there is one other job that is tree related that is really good to do right now, and that is to apply dormant oil. But before I get to the pruning part of this, there's one other job that I want to just get off the list right away, and that is spraying dormant oil on things like my apple tree, my pear tree, my Asian pear, and then also my crabapple Belgian fence that I have in the vegetable garden. This helps a lot with preventing disease issues and bug issues, and I just follow the directions on the package for the timing of this and how to do this. And dormant oil spray is a pretty innocuous thing to be spraying in your garden. Now, this isn't the only spraying I will do of these particular trees. I do come back and do a copper fungicide at the right time for cedar apple rust. The application to treat for that is later. That's not what I'm worrying about right now. This is just sort of a general disease and potential insect thing that I'm spraying for now. So let's go do that. I've already got the pump sprayer all set up. All right, so I've got my pump sprayer all set up. This is a battery operated one, which is really quite nice. And I think it goes on this side, and I have to find my on button. So we are standing at the Asian pear. So the process for this is the same on all of these trees. The key is you want to coat every little bit, and you want to coat, make sure you get underneath. That's why the pump sprayer is actually really nice. If you're using like a hand spray, which you can buy them pre-mixed, but that's a lot of hand pumping. You want to make sure you get there and you go until basically the branches are dripping. Now it's nice that I grow, these are all Espalier trees that I'm going to be treating, because there's not as much surface area as there is in other trees. So here we go. And that's it. It goes so quick with this sprayer. Now this is a Liberty apple, and I bought this as a Espalier. So I did not train this originally myself, but I have kept extending the arms over the years. I would say this was bought and planted in maybe 2018 or so, or 2019, one of the two. Watch out, bud. Can you back up? Come on, back up. I keep up on keeping these pruned pretty well. I say I will prune these like almost any time of year. Really doesn't bother me. I just try to keep them obviously sort of nice and short. I sort of aim for finger length. So I'm going to cut this back to where there's like a bunch of little sprouts coming out. It's pretty obvious when you're doing this for the most part, or create that. And like I do let the ends keep going because I will keep running this down the length of the fence until I decide I don't want to anymore. So if you look right here, you can see we've got like a big long, shoot here, which is too long. But you can see here, if you come back to here, see how we've got like a bunch of little buds kind of coming out? Well, that is where you're going to get fruit. If you are growing something espalier, you want to keep up on it because once you let it go, I mean, you can get it back, but it's like you can see here, here's a big long stem that I should have dealt with ages ago. And I didn't. So now it's actually quite a long stem that's sticking out the front there. I suppose I could cut that whole thing off, but I don't really want to do that. So especially at the bottom here, you can see I've got some really long growth on some of these. So this pear is a pretty good example of how it should have been cut back more over the years. And again, I think you can kind of gradually bring it down, but you're sacrificing potential fruit. Although I will say this has not been a particularly productive plant for me. This has not been, I've not gotten a lot of pears off of this, mostly because as soon as I get a pear, a squirrel comes and gets it. Now there's 2 tall branches that I'd like to get, but I don't have a ladder, so I'll have to wait to get those some other time. And I think that's fine. I don't stress about the timing on these things really that much at all. And as far as pruning goes back here on the crab apple Belgian fence, of which there are numerous videos on the channel from creating this from scratch. Really, there's very little to do because I do keep up very closely on this. It just looks so much better when it stays. I mean, the form looks so much better when we keep everything nice and short on it. So there is very little in the way of like random long, like there's maybe one little guy right here that I would prune back. But for the most part, this is looking good. And I actually prune this off after fruit sets. I will prune anything that's getting too long that doesn't have fruit on it. Okay, so now we're on to doing a little bit of pruning. This is the Cornus moss, the Cornelian cherry dogwood that is planted near the end of the driveway. We planted this in 2020 and it has grown so well. I mean, it was a pretty big plant when we grew it, but it's done so well in this spot. Basically what I'm doing here is taking out some of those lowest branches. This definitely grows up and then wide, which is what we wanted here, was a nice wide tree in this spot. This is pretty simple pruning. I'm just taking out some, it's basically essentially limbing things up for the most part. I used both the loppers for this as well as just my trimming saw, which is, pretty simple folding saw, but it's sharp. And I find that I get a much cleaner cut on most of it, at least the bigger things, with that trimming saw. So in some cases, I'll lop it and then I'll come back. In terms of trimming here, I think it's just very much a personal preference about what you want to take out. And so obviously I'm spending a lot of time looking at things. I did take out a couple of crossing branches here and there. There was a couple of actually very bad crossing branches in there that I should have gotten after a lot sooner. And then always the traditional pruning advice holds, which is prune back to something. So in this case, I'm pruning back to a main stem. Sometimes if you're pruning mid-branch, and we'll get to some of those on some other plants, you want to prune back to a bud. But here I'm pruning back to the largest main stem. There were a couple of low branches on the back side of it too, so I went and got those out of there just to make sure that it's got a good shape all around, even though the lower branches on that back side of it, at least as viewed from here, are less important. Now, I wasn't planning on doing any pruning on this viburnum that grows off the patio garden, but I was walking by with my pruning stuff, and that's often how this works for me, is I'm in that mode, so I'm looking for things. This is not the right time to prune a viburnum for shape or size, because you will be cutting off flowers if you prune at this time of year. However, what I was doing here was removing some branches. So this first big branch that I took off in the back was growing right into the urn. So that kind of needed to go. And with this, in this case, I started with the loppers, lopped it off, and then went back to clean up the cut against the stem with the pruner. This shrub is really congested. It's very hard to get a good angle on things, so you kind of have to get creative into how you tackle things. And then on the right side, there's a few of those stems that lay quite close to the ground, which I've kind of liked the look of in the past. But now that I took off that back stem, it felt a little unbalanced to me. So I thought at least the lowest of those needed to come out. And again, it is really hard to get the right angle in here without accidentally cutting something else. Right next to that is the purple smokebush, which you can see that I've pole-arted this last year. You can see those thick stems, and then you can see all the spindly stems coming out of it. Well, that's where I pole-arted it last year, and it grew really well. I was really happy with how it looked. So I'm keeping that same level that I cut it to last year, and I'm pruning those whippy stems. And for the most part, I'm cutting those back to right above a bud. And the buds look like little black dots, basically, at this time of year. That should create a little bit more branching there. I could have cut these all the way back to that pollarded location again, but I didn't because I knew where everything was going to be here. So this is basically a really quick prune, just getting rid of the wispy stems on this, and it should look really nice. Now, this will eliminate any chance of having flowers on this smoke bush. So you don't really want to be doing any spring pruning on a smoke bush if you're growing it for the flowers. I don't really care about the flowers on smoke bush, so I always prune these in spring. Next was the heptacodium. That's the seven sun flower that I planted last year. Now, I don't want to be doing a lot of pruning on this because you really shouldn't prune a tree a lot in those first 2 to 3 years after you plant it. You don't really want to do anything that's going to encourage a lot more growth. You want all that plant's energy going into establishing those roots. But some of these branches that were sticking out the sides were really bothering me. I did prune out a few last year when I planted it, and I took out a few more this time as well because I could not abide by them anymore. Ultimately, I probably want this multi-stem tree to go to a 5-stem tree, but that is probably many years down the road because I will not take out big stems in big chunks. I will take out them one by one probably, except where there's some damage. Next up was the Kodiak Red Diervilla that grows along the garage. I was actually pruning in the snow. I sort of stopped at some point here because I didn't want to stand in the snow. But this is one of those shrubs that will take pruning very well. So you can prune this basically down to the ground. You could prune some stems and no stems. In this case, I'm pruning it down to about 12 inches basically. It just is such a tough shrub, and you can do almost anything you want to it in terms of pruning. So these were getting quite tall, actually taller than I anticipated they would. Not too tall, but taller than I expected them to. So I thought for a little bit of size, this is really about size control. So we're going down to about a foot or so. I wasn't even measuring. And this is one where I'm cutting back to a bud. I imagine with a shrub like this, you could probably take a hedge pruners to it and just cut it straight. It's not really my preference. I don't think it's the best look. But if you had a huge amount of them, you could probably do that. I like to go through individually with the stems and cut back to a bud. So I kind of got all the easy pruning out of the way before I tackled the hornbeam hedge. This is a European hornbeam. Just to give you a little history of this, and there are a bunch of videos on the channel about planting this and pruning this and everything, but the first 6 are Lucas varieties. So they are a very skinny variety, and then I could no longer get those. So the rest of them are actually just fastigiata. So I sort of switched. They look the same, but the other ones are newer too. So the first 6 are the originals, and I'd have to look back to when I planted these. It's some time ago. I got this great tripod orchard ladder a couple years ago. or no, last year, and was such a good investment. It was an investment, but it is so much better, so much easier, and so much safer to do this pruning with. You saw me using a tape measure there. I used to prune these to 110 inches. They've now gotten to the point where I'm taking them with that ladder. I'm taking up to, I think it was 120. What I do is I measure that first one to get a guideline of where I want to cut everything back to. And then when I'm up there, I just eyeball the rest of them to kind of match that first one as best I can. This is not meant to be like a perfectly square hedge on the top. I'm okay with a more natural look, thank goodness. So what I'm really looking for here is just kind of keeping a general level. Now, so mostly I'm pruning at the top on these. I did do a little bit of side pruning, but at some point during the process here, I realized that at least these first 6 are now mature enough that I really need to be taking a hedge pruners to them and just doing like a light shear on the sides, which will encourage more bushy growth along those sides. Really, it was just taking a long time for them to grow, and I was working on bulking them up by actually reducing the height of them rather than worrying about the sides. But now the sides are starting to come out a little bit, and so I think we'll get a more solid wall here if I start doing hedge pruning. I don't own a hedge pruner, so I'm actually going to buy a hedge pruner attachment for one of my battery-operated tools. And I am going to start shearing these a little bit on those sides. And I didn't take you through doing this whole row because it's a lot of repetitive stuff. There's not as much cutting to do on the tops as there was. We're getting pretty good on that. And then for the newer ones, I had to do very little pruning, really. Then, this is really out there. If you recall, this ginkgo has looked really wonky. It lost its leader early on in its life. I think this is Goldspire ginkgo. It lost its leader very early on in its life. I tried to establish a new leader, but I couldn't get a pole high enough to keep that leader pointing in the right direction, so it fell hard off to one side. So I am cutting off that what sort of was the new leader at some point here, which is just heading off in the completely wrong direction. And you're going to see the shape of this plant. I don't know that this was the right call, to be honest with you, but this is kind of a mongrel plant anyway. Ever since it's lost its leader when it was tiny, it's not been right. So you can see that is a big chunk I just took out of this. So this is a bit of an experiment to see what happens, but really there was no hope for this ginkgo with the situation that was happening. So at some point you're like, well, we're going to try this, and it can only make it better because it really couldn't have gotten any worse. So here you can see off to the right where I took that big chunk out. I don't know what's going to happen, to be honest. We'll see. I hope I didn't do something, really terrible to this thing. I guess my old habit of just making a giant mess everywhere I go and not picking up until the end holds true, because I'm finally going to go pick up all the sticks that I made from all this trimming. So we've had quite a bit more snow melting since I was last out here, which is fabulous because I can keep up with some of the pruning that I kind of had to stop so I didn't have to just walk through snow. And all these sticks are they're going to have a second life. They all have a purpose that we'll talk about soon. But for now, I'm going to try to be a little bit better about actually cleaning up after myself, because sometimes, since that is not my general inclination, you end up in a situation where you can't do anything in the garden because you got to clean up all the stuff you should have cleaned up before. And that doesn't make for a very good day of gardening at all. All right, well, I'm going to keep cleaning up here, but that is a most satisfying job. Oh, I mean, I don't know that I would necessarily love doing these tree jobs as much if it were the middle of summer, but when I'm dying to just do something outside, there is nothing better. All right, I hope you guys are having a great day in your garden. Thank you for watching. We'll see you soon.